We can get started. Just wanted to welcome everyone. We are going to be presenting today on a session called Making Meaning of Data, Basic Steps to Clean and Organize Your Data for Use. So this is a beginner data-friendly user session. So hopefully if you've had some experience, you'll still learn some tips and tricks, but it's definitely primarily for the beginner data user. All right, so if you have not done so already, we're just going to take a minute here to open this link. It is also in the chat. So either type in the tiny URL or go to the chat and you will find a data set in there. We will be working through this data set later on in the session, so we ask that everyone has a copy. In order to do that, you can go to File, then there's a selection, make a copy, and rename it whatever you would like. And again, we will be going through the presentation using Google Sheets. If you are not able to use Google Sheets for some reason, you are welcome to download it into Excel. Many of the functions that we're going through are also applicable to Excel. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time today to both go over all of the steps in Google Sheets and then Excel, but do your best to follow along if you're in Excel, and we'll stick around at the end if you have Excel specific questions. But again, open it if you can in Google Sheets, and we'll just give everyone 30 seconds to do that now. All right. So just quickly to give you an overview of what we'll be going through today, we'll do a brief introduction of who we are and about Appletree, which is where both Katrina and I work. We're going to define a term called dark data, which some of you may have heard of before. For some, it might be a new term. We're going to touch on why it's important to clean your data. We are going to discuss and give examples of clean versus unclean data. We'll be walking through data cleaning steps with opportunities to follow along. So that's where the Google Sheet comes in. So we'll be doing a I do, you do, I do, we do, you do sort of scenario. And then we'll be closing out with a self-reflection about thinking, how can these practices be applied to your own campus? And if you have any questions, again, we kind of have to, we'll be trying to get through everything and hurrying along, but please feel free to use the chat feature. Really quickly introduce myself. So I am Lara Burt. I am a social worker and data coordinator at Appletree. Have been in the data realm for the past few years, actually transitioning full-time to social worker next year, hence the kind of in-between titles right now.
Yeah, she's a do-it-all. So my name is Katrina Gagliano. I'm a research associate with Appletree Institute. Lara and I have worked together for a while on data projects, and specifically on extensive cleaning of large data sets. So I think that her and I are probably good people to talk through some of the basic steps of how to clean it up and how to make it more manageable and easier to view to wider audiences.
Great. So just really quickly, as I mentioned, we work at Appletree. Appletree is a nonprofit organization consisting of a research and development institute, which Katrina works on that side for, and then a public charter school, which has 11 schools across DC in all 4 quadrants, and we serve preschool and pre-K students.
Okay, so let's get into dark data. Dark data is essentially unknown or unused data. And there's a lot of this in the business sector, but in the education sector too. So think of unused data as being things that folks maybe collected over time and then never went back to, or it might be unknown about because it might be things like call logs or timestamps, data that was actually collected alongside another piece of data just incidentally. I think when we automate and when businesses have a lot of online features, data just kind of piles up, it pours in the background, and that's dark data. It's like all the pools of data that exist in organizations in the background that is unused. Okay, so examples of dark data, I mentioned call logs, timestamps, but it could also be things like raw survey responses, even an attendance roster, things as simple as that. That's all dark data if it's not used. The dangers of dark data are that even in simple things like call logs or these attendance trackers, there are missed opportunities if that dark data is not lightened or cleaned. But the good thing is that if you know how to lighten it, you know how to access those opportunities within the data. So we'll talk more about this, but if you think about any dark data, there are steps to lighten it. So the first one is to ask questions. This would be, what kind of data is at our organization? What could we do with it? What data is within that data? Who might be interested in this data? And then exploring it. We're going to go through that, cleaning it. After all of those steps, then comes analysis and visualization, but some of that can happen in the explore and clean steps. So don't think that for this presentation, you have to know any type of software or anything like that. Excuse me, there are simple analysis and visualization steps within the explore and clean. The analyze and visualize is like if you're going to send it off to someone that does use R or SPSS or Stata. All of these question, explore, and clean tips will help you pass it along to that person and make their life easier too. The next step is to share and collaborate with partners. Like I said, oftentimes with dark data, there are gold nuggets within it that multiple teams can use. So that's important, as well as to share out, to report out anything that you find out about your dark data. And then the last one is kind of, I imagine it as kind of like the reduce, reuse, recycle arrow, where it comes back to the front. It's ask more questions and revisit each step as needed. So let's say that after analyzing your data, you realize, oh, there's actually something else here than what we thought there was, or, ooh, there's an issue here that we might need to look into. You want to take yourself back to asking questions, maybe exploring, get a little bit more into that side of the data, clean, and just keep it on go and go from there. Okay, so now that you know what dark data is, and again, it could be unknown data or unused, can you think now of any examples of dark data at your own campus or organization? So I'm hoping that folks will use the chat option in Whova to answer this question. I'm going to have that open. So take a couple minutes to reflect, and again, this could be things that seem really trivial, that are collected in the background. They're there, and there is a way to make meaning of them.
Someone said communication logs. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, is my chat not updated?
And sometimes like you might collect a whole number of like responses to a survey or something, and most of the data you go through, but you might never read through those open-ended responses. So that's another example. Student RSVP forms. Yeah, free form notes on calls with constituents.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the free form notes, because when you think about making meaning something or using something and taking it from one format to another, when you think about it, like sticky notes with people's phone numbers and addresses and that one thought you had over here and over here, all of that is data. So putting that together in a way that you can make meaning of it is really, these are really powerful skills.
Great.
Okay. So this is a very brief, this might be kind of like a no-brainer, but just before we get into exploring and cleaning data, I wanted to give a real quick precaution from an analysis side about why we clean our data. It's not that like someone messed up in data collection. Think about it as you always have to clean data. It is not an optional step. It is required. Anything that comes in, treat it as unclean and unexplored. So raw data contains errors that could be different formats like numbers or words. If it's open-ended, it might be folks that had typos in their response. Or let's say if you are coming from a survey response and you made an open-ended portion of it required, but folks didn't have any response, you might see NA or that kind of gibberish response. So cleaning data removes all of those kinds of inevitable inconsistencies. So think about it as standardizing or evening out your data set. And not only does it make later analysis much, much easier, but it also makes visualization easier for anybody. So let's say, you wanted to show parents an attendance roster, or, something like someone else said, the communication logs or open-ended feedback. Having this really lengthy, wordy, different formats, it's hard to see. So yes, this helps make things easier for analysis, but it also just makes things nicer, prettier, easier to see upon first glance. So again, this is like a very important step. Okay, so we're going to go into an example now. We have this fake data set. If anybody is a fan of R&B or hip hop music or the show Insecure, you will notice the names out here. But there are a bunch of errors in here. This is an example of an unclean data set. This would be maybe a format of a survey response. So did you have any feedback? Would you be willing to present again next quarter? And if you look through the responses, we have things in different formats. We have some additional spacers. So yeah, can anybody point out a couple things that they might see right off the bat when they look at this that might make analysis hard? It doesn't have to be lengthy statistical analyses. It might just be if you're showing this to someone else and you think right away, ooh, they might not get that upon first glance. So Lara is going to help me monitor the chat. Taking a look at this data set, what do you see that you'd be like, I don't know about that?
So someone noted the date format. Nice. So one of the dates, yes, we noticed that July 6th is a little bit different than the other formatting.
That was our first one.
Someone noted that there is a duplication. Good. So the last two rows are duplicates of one another.
Yep, absolutely.
Pre-K and pre-K spelled differently. You guys are awesome. Toddler versus toddler class usually.
Perfect. Perfect. This one is just a bunch of spaces in front of yes. Anything that makes things uneven when you look at it. Our hope is to have everything logged the exact same way so that we can not only see it easier, but analyze it easier. And the better you clean it, the better you analyze it. Google, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but both Google and Excel are fabulous at creating your charts and graphs for you. So the better you clean it and do these kind of pre-work steps, the better you'll be able to just do, a 1, 2, 3 click and have things come out nicely to view. Okay, so let's finish off here. These were some open-ended responses. Like I said, if maybe an open-ended survey section was required, no, NA, no, not really. If it was a feedback that they said, no, not really, I'm bored, well, bored is still feedback, so we'd keep it. But in this case, no, I do not have feedback, or NA, not really. Those are things that we can erase. And then someone else already mentioned Yvonne Orgy, shout out Insecure, is the duplicate at the bottom. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this when we get into cleaning and exploring our data. But it's kind of a mess, the top. It doesn't look like it, but it's just very lengthy. If someone maybe didn't know this survey, they would have to read through each question in order to understand the responses below it. So moving on to an example of that data cleaned. As folks pointed out, we have all of the dates on the left in the same format. We deleted the bottom row, the duplicate. Both PS, PK, and toddler, all of that is now the same format. It's standardized. The feedback, the feedback is erased, the ones that were like NA. And then the headers, so I'm going to go back real quick. Instead of presenter name and which classroom do you primarily teach, we just have name, classroom, next year's interest, and feedback. And another reason, like I said about Google and Excel, doing really nice things for you is that if you think about like your elementary school X and Y graph, presenter name and in which classroom do you primarily teach would have to be either your X and Y axis. But if you come here, you're potentially able to tell Google, hey, I want you to look at name by classroom or next year interest by classroom. And those things will have already been titled as categories for you as variables. Okay. I'm going to stop just for a second to see if anybody has any questions about this so far, about dark data, about why it's important to clean it. Lara, if you could help me. I think your internet connection is faster than mine, which is why I'm not seeing chats as quickly as you are.
No questions at the moment.
Okay. Okay. All right. So my whole thing about approaching your data carefully and understanding that it's not optional to clean your data, one of the first things that we need to do when we're looking at our data is understanding what type of data we have. And what does unclean necessarily mean? Is it an error? Is it someone that just put, a gibberish nonsense string of letters? Or is it actually missing data? And then once you've decided whether or not, it's just random errors, it's wrong, or whether or not it's unclean because it's missing, that will help us understand how to clean it. And then there's two types of missing data that I wanted to touch on just very quickly. There's called missing at random and missing not at random. Missing at random would be things like a duplicate survey entry, or maybe someone just forgot to put something and you can go back and ask them. That would be randomly missing. It just doesn't happen to be in your set. Maybe you can fix your questions next time to ask things. Maybe you forgot to make something a required question so people skipped over it in a survey. That would be randomly missing. Non-randomly missing means there's a pattern to your missing data, and that's a little bit more concerning. So this is important because let's say we're really hoping to get a bunch of data from this one classroom about how their students were doing, or from this one community about what the parents needed. If you find that there's a very specific number of people that didn't come, maybe that subsection of people didn't come for a reason. Maybe they needed childcare. Maybe there's a certain amount of people that didn't show up for a training on an attendance roster, and we have to say, ooh, maybe that specific campus didn't get the email, something like that. It's just kind of an intro to go into this and say that although you can know a bunch of tips such as find and replace all, you don't want to just haphazardly, willy-nilly be erasing a bunch of information that you do have, or unknowingly skipping over things that are important to go back and say, hey, why is that missing? Maybe it's not random. So that's just a little prerequisite.
All right, thank you, Katrina. So we are going to take a quick breather on this slide. I'm going to preface the next portion of our presentation and where we'll be going from here, which is the data cleaning steps. So I noticed some people have joined potentially since my announcement at the beginning. If you haven't done so already, kind of the last opportunity to make a copy of the data set that can be found in the chat. I linked it in there, so you'd go to File, make a copy, and rename it whatever you'd like. For the next maybe 10 or so slides, we'll be having that data set open and having you all have opportunities to work through it. So please do that now if you have not already. So kind of how we'll be doing the next portion is we'll be going through and talking through steps that we take when we get a data set, talking about how we explore the data, and then steps we use to clean the data. We are going to give like a brief little note about each of those steps, and then play a video, which we've pre-recorded, of us doing those steps in Google Sheets. So you all can follow along, just to give a visual example. Just as a side note, we might be moving like a little quickly through the slides. There's a lot to get through. If we're going way too fast, please chat us. We'll try to slow down. But if you miss something in the video, unfortunately, we won't have time to replay the video, but all of the steps are also found in that Google workbook that you all are making copies of. So there's an exploring data and a cleaning data tab. And those are all the steps that we were going to be walking through. So if you miss something, you can of course chat, we'll try to answer, but you will have access to the videos and all the steps are laid out in your own workbook. So, and then my other note is you'll see that we're going through, and Katrina kind of touched on, we're going to be talking about survey data responses, and Katrina and I chose this type of data because we were thinking about at Appletree, during this time of distance learning and virtual learning, we have been sending out a lot of surveys to families, to teachers, like evaluations via surveys, because while we're in school, we might have different touch points with teachers, or just be focus groups that we can get feedback from teachers or families on, or just have a better sense of like how people are feeling or doing. We've really relied on surveys at this point to kind of collect that data. And then we also figured not just data folks send out surveys, school leaders, teachers, lots of people send out surveys, so that this could be kind of a helpful data set to walk through, no matter your level. So yeah, like some of what we'll teach or what we'll go through are primarily or will be used on surveys, but they can apply to other types of data sets. And some of them might be more basic steps that you're already familiar with, but I think no matter where you are, you'd like be able to learn at least a couple tips and tricks for you all to clean data. So that is my very long preface before we move on to the next slide. So please have your Google Sheet open, and Katrina will lead us through the first step.
Bouncing real quick off of what Lara said, even the most advanced statisticians need clean data to work with. So again, these might be beginner things, these might be tips and tricks, but if you ever did not have survey data in the future and you were jumping into, let's say, 1,000 participant type of data set, these would be even more important in order to clean and format things correctly for them to be able to be loaded into a software for more advanced analyses. Okay, so that all being said, it's important, don't skip it, you gotta do it, any kind of data. All right, so first we're gonna start with formatting headers and columns. I'm gonna play the video that we have, and then folks can follow along doing this on their own. We'll take a couple minutes afterwards to see if folks have any questions, and we will go from there. Get it a little bit bigger. Okay, so here is our data set. We have the office folks here. For our headers, what Lara did was she wrapped the text in order to make sure we could see everything. She center justified it. That's just a personal preference. It's something that I do too, but especially center justifying numbers. That makes it a lot easier for folks to see. And then this is kind of what we mentioned about simplifying the headers. Instead of just seeing how old are you or any additional feedback, we can just change it to age, session title, glows and grows, things like that. Okay. You can also, what Lara did here, you can also double click the edge and that will open up the dimension of that column in order to make sure that the entire title is captured there. So again, these are just very intro things to make it more visually appealing before you jump into other things. And you know, it might seem silly, like left justified, right justified. It makes things much easier to see if you have large data sets that include both numbers and text. All right.
So you all have the same, or you all have the same data set that we're working through too. So yeah, take 2 minutes to just practice wrapping the text, aligning, adjusting the columns, and we're here for questions for just a minute or two before moving on.
Another thing, just throwing it out there, another thing that is nice about well-formatted and clean data is that it makes errors easy to see, right? So that's one thing, is that if there are any blanks or question marks or things that are misspelled, even in a big data set, if everything is kind of standardized and easy to view, it just makes everyone's life easier.
So someone just noted that they like immediately started formatting as soon as they made a copy of the Google Sheet, which is like what we do too. We had to slow down. We're like, okay, we wrap the text. Like these are just things that we do now, but it definitely makes it a lot visually appealing and easier to interpret.
and everybody has their own preference. Lara and I went back and forth. Oh, I center justify everything first, and then I wrap the text. I mean, it's something that many folks do just without thinking about it, but it can save you a lot of time on the back end. Excuse me, doing this on the back end will save you time on the front end. Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and move forward. All right, applying filters. So exploring through filters and sorting will help you understand how to clean your data. I'm gonna play this video. All right, so you're gonna select the range of cells that's included in your data. You're gonna go up to the bar, click data, and click create a filter. All right, that little upside down triangle with the stick coming off of it, not sure what it's supposed to be, but that's the filter button. That's where you can see your filters, create filters. This is what your filter looks like. It just helps you select things easier. It also helps you get an understanding of how much data you have, whether or not there are duplicates, and it'll help you sort things easier too, especially when you have big data sets. Lara also included some shorthand for both Excel and Google. So in that workbook, let's say you want to automatically do some funky, Command Shift, that kind of stuff. You can click on cell A1, Command Shift right arrow, and then Command Shift down arrow, and that will automatically select your data range. The only thing that is kind of a caveat to that is if you have a blank space and then some more data under it, it won't go through that space. You have to click it twice. So that's actually one of the reasons why in the video, Lara selected the entire range manually.
And that is written in your workbook. So you're not expected to remember all the keyboard shortcuts, but that's a quicker way to select a range. So yeah, take another minute here, apply a filter to your data set, play around with filtering different columns, and we'll move on to the next slide after that. But again, always feel free to ask questions, and we'll leave time for questions at the end too, but we just wanna give you this time to kind of explore the data, because there are definitely some errors in there, so maybe you all this time will give you a chance to identify those.
Yeah. Filtering is also a great way to help different folks view different subsets of that data, because filters cannot be unfiltered by somebody that doesn't have editing access. So let's say I only wanted to show folks at the Northwest campus their data, I would filter so that it only shows Northwest, and then I would protect that filter or lock it, and nobody else could change it. So that's one way, but it's also good to remember that if you do have something filtered and you ask someone else to hop on and look at it, you have to remind them, otherwise they'll say, oh, I only see 3 things, and you have to say, oh, I'm sorry, I'll go back and undo the filter so that all of the data shows up. So that being said, last year we did a randomized controlled trial at Appletree Institute, and we had, again, it was one of those just monumental data sets, and filtering and sorting was invaluable in our analysis process, especially when you maybe want to see scores that are, and we'll get into this later, but between 1 and 7 or lower than 50%, all of those things you're able to do through sorting and filters. So that's a good one, a big one. Okay, any questions, Lara?
Nope.
Okay, keep it moving. Okay. Freezing rows or columns. This is something that is another thing that you might not think about. It's like you might just do it when you jump in. So when you go down and you lose the column headers, the row headers, that can be a big pain in the butt, especially if your data set is big. So you can go to View, Freeze, up to Current Row. And then as you move down, the row will stay so that you can still know what you're looking at, as you scroll. You can also freeze columns. same thing. And that way, as you go all the way to the end, let's see, to these open responses, and I see someone wanted to bring snacks next time, I can say, hey, who was that? And the names will have popped over with it. It's also worth noting that you can unfreeze and freeze at any time. So let's say next time someone else came in, they just wanted to see session title or up to session title, you can freeze there as well. Again, same thing in that this is really, really helpful for giant data sets where maybe you scroll all the way to row 500 and you need to make sure that once you go across, you still know exactly which values pertain to which headers. All right, so take another second, do some freezing. All right. The next one that we have is exploring data and sorting through filters. So this is one of those things where you can use filters and sorting simultaneously. You can apply 3 filters and then sort. You can sort and then apply 2 filters. These are things that can be done in conjunction. So it's worth playing around with filters and sorting for a while to understand your data a little bit better too. This also might be the first time that as you're sorting and filtering that you see things that are errors, the blanks, the nonsense word strings, that kind of thing. And again, especially if you have big data and you can't just scroll and look through it and look at this cell in this column, this is the way that you get around that.
Katrina, also just as a note, we had a question of whether you can freeze multiple sections, the first column and the first row. The answer is absolutely. You can go to the view first row or freeze up to first row, and same thing with up to whatever column you select. So you can definitely do that. We'll save like 5 or so minutes at the end to just share our screen. And if you have questions, we can specifically walk through those. So keep on asking your questions. We'll try to get to them, but yes.
All right. So here I'm going to do a few filters as well as a sort. Oh, and I shortened the screen capture. So you can't see at the top right now, like the file, data, everything like that. But once you get into filtering and sorting, you don't need those buttons anymore. You would go directly to the header and to the right where those 3 arrows are. That's how you're going to access all your different sorting and filtering options. All right, so this time around, I went to name and I sorted alphabetically. So it just rearranges everything for you very nicely. Now I'm going to add a filter. I'm going to clear everything, and I only want to see folks from Northwest. Awesome, and let's say the principal there said, well, who from my campus went to what session? All right, so now you have, I'm going to show you how to undo it, but now you have a subset of your data. And again, say you wanted to, you could lock it on this so that only folks from Northwest could see it. All right, and then just showing you how to undo it, you just have to go back, select all, bring all your data back again. All right, and the sort function for alphabetical order can also be used for numbers as well. It's worth noting. And again, since there are so many different ways that you can filter and sort, that's one that you could play with for quite a while. There are a bunch of different options in there. It gets pretty granular as far as how you want to see the data and what you want to show up.
Rachel had a question about, can you show how to lock so only certain folks can see it? That's a great thing. I'm adding it to the list to do in the last 5 minutes, just since it's not exploring or cleaning per se, but we can definitely show you how to do that.
Yep. Okay. So now we are going to open up a little exercise for folks, a little challenge using both the filter and sort functions. If you could let us know in the chat box how many people from the Southeast campus attended the session differentiated reading tracks. And again, just from an attendance roster, that's something that you would be able to narrow down and tell folks in order to give them, more accurate data. Give a couple minutes for that. They'll get harder.
We have a couple of responses coming in.
Okay.
So everyone is saying 3.
Nice. That is correct. That is correct. All right. So super easy peasy to start off with, but it's a good way to know that even if you start off with this giant data set, there is a way to narrow it down in order to answer very specific questions without doing analysis, without getting into anything that seems complicated. Okay. I put these in here. This is kind of the next step, so we're not going to go over it too extensively, but I just wanted to show folks about the Explore function in Google Sheets. We use Google Sheets primarily at Appletree, and this is a function that I guess it's not new, but within the last few years, it's on the bottom right. So here's our spreadsheet. I screenshot the exact same one that y'all have. So it's on the bottom right. It's this Explore button. When you pop that up, if your data is formatted nicely, Google will show you so much. So down here it says, hey, maybe you want to see a graph like this, a frequency count, and then you can just click this and say, bloop, add into my spreadsheet, or maybe a pie chart about which folks attended from which campus. Instead of having to click chart and set up this entire thing, Google just says, hey, based on your data, this is what I can do for you. There's also this questions and answer function in the Explore bar as well. So let's say I want to know the average of column D, or if someone else comes in and says, I don't know this person's data, I just want to know the greatest value in this column. You can just type it in as if you were saying it. And if you type it in the way Google wants it to be, they will pop out an answer. So the average age of folks that attended our trainings was 41 years old, 42 years old rounded. And then if you wanted to create that as a formula, it even gives you the formula that you could just drag to insert into a cell. 2020, man.
Yeah, we're getting lots of brilliant and mind-blown responses. Katrina and I recently discovered this button as well. Katrina, do you mind, there's a question of where to find the Explore button, maybe
oh yeah, let's
sharing either your screen or showing how they can access that.
Yeah, sure. Oh, moving ahead. I have 100 tabs up. I might not be able to do it right away. So it should be in the bottom right of your entire Google Sheet.
Maybe I'm adding it to our list to show at the end, but
yeah.
It is at the bottom right of the Google Sheet.
It's called Explore, and it opens you up to a world of possibility. Pivot tables also, something that I struggled with when I first started doing data analysis and data cleaning and all of this kind of stuff, and it gives you automatic suggestions for pivot tables. It really is mind-blowing.
And is there an Excel option, or what? We looked that up, right? I don't remember.
Comparable Excel function is this? Definitely not. Yeah. Okay. Not that I know of anyway. The immediate analytics or immediate insights into your data, I don't think so.
So if you're in Excel, you might not be seeing this, but Google Sheets should have it.
It's also much easier to start with one of these, pre-formatted charts and then edit it from there as opposed to, like I was saying, starting from scratch and having to edit the titles, the X and Y axis, and all of that kind of stuff. This is going to save lives out here.
Okay.
All right, we're going to keep it moving. Again, I highly recommend playing around with this more. There are so many tutorials and YouTube videos about what you can do with it. You can format things in different colors. You can make extensive formulas. You can make yourself look like a genius. Okay.
All right, so I am going to go over some of the data cleaning steps. So Katrina just walked you through kind of how we explore the data. While exploring the data, you likely came across some of the errors that we have sprinkled into this data set for you all to find. So exploring is a great first step, but now we're going to show you some tools to clean the data. So two of the data cleaning steps that we take are removing duplicate data, which can be bad if you have 10 survey responses and 2 are duplicates. That will kind of skew the responses and make it inaccurate because it's 2 are the same. So, and then removing extra spaces. Sometimes people are like typing along, adding in a bunch of spaces, typing along some more. And that's just important, one, to make it more legible when you are reading it. And then also if you're using any like analysis software and like keyword finding software like tools, then you need to make sure that all of those spaces are removed. But there are 2 very easy ways to do that, which we will show you in the video. All right, so for the purpose of this video, yeah, we're good. Okay. I've highlighted the duplicates. So we have 2 Dwight Schrutes that maybe, let's say, I found while exploring the data, 2 Moses, Dwight's cousin, and 2 Ryan Howard. So I manually colored those rows just for the purpose of this presentation. So I first select the data set, then I go up to data in the toolbar, and I go down to remove duplicates. Then I go up and select data has header row, which is row 1 in this case. And then I go to remove duplicates. And it says 2 duplicate rows were found and removed. So press OK. So as we see, we have 1 Dwight Schrute left. So the second one got deleted. There's still 2 Moses left, which is because the rows were not exactly the same data. So we'll not delete the data that are not exact duplicates. So this Mose didn't delete or submit twice. He filled out 2 sessions that has both of his names, but they were 4 different sessions. So I kind of think this is nice because it doesn't delete the rows unless they're exact duplicates. The other thing are these cells show that there are many additional spaces that these people have added in. Bring snacks, blank, 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 blank next time. So in order to get rid of those spaces, we are going to highlight our data set, go to data, and go down to trim white space. And trimmed white space from 14 selected cells. So that means there's extra spaces in 14 selected cells. Gonna go, and if you look at column J now, all of those spaces are removed, and they are just nice, beautiful sentences. So we can stop. I think it's just, So we're gonna take a minute here, find the duplicates and trim their white spaces in your own data sets. Take a minute to do that. All right, and again, if you're looking for instructions on these, they can all be found in the data cleaning tab in your workbook, the step-by-step instructions. So we're going to move on to the next tab or next slide.
Okay.
So Katrina showed you filter and sort. As just like an exploration tool, I'm going to show you an example of how you can use it to identify and remove invalid responses. Katrina, this might be the 0.75 speed one. I'm not possibly.
Yes.
We had to slow some of the videos down. So how we filter and sort in order to clean the data.
I'll make this a little slower so Lara can talk it through for us.
All right. So I'm going to start by sorting the data by age. So we go, the filter is already applied here, probably from earlier. I filter it from lowest to highest number. And when doing that, I noticed that Creed said he was 120 years old. I know that's not true, so it's a false data point, so I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to delete years old, which only Angela put in to make their data uniform with all of the other data points. So filter and sorting helped me identify those two errors and correct them. If you knew Creed's age, you could enter the correct one in. Because we don't, we're just deleting it. Next, in some of the open-ended responses, I go to the filter in order to read through some of the responses and see if there are any errors. So in this one, all of them look correct, except some people put question marks. So I'm going to select the question mark and select OK. And then I'm going to delete those because those aren't valid data points. So I'm going to highlight them and just press delete on my keyboard. Then in order to make sure all the data comes back, I'm reviewing it one more time using filter and sort to review it. And then I am pressing select all again and OK. I find this to be really helpful with some of the open-ended responses to kind of identify, especially if it's a larger data set, what gibberish or nonsense or not real answers are in there. So going through, I see someone wrote gibberish, someone wrote no and A, which we want to delete. Another gibberish answer. I think people were done with this survey. So pressing OK. Then I highlight the ones I want to delete and press delete. And then I make sure to select all again. So then all of the responses come back. And Katrina, we can stop it and give. Oh, and I think I missed an NA, I noticed, and just deleted it there. But so I'm just going through the different columns. I'm filtering and using the filter button to kind of read through some of the responses that I will want to delete, checking those, and then deleting it in the sheet. So we'll take a minute here. We kind of speeding through. I think we have one more video to share, but definitely want to leave time to just share our screen and answer any other questions.
I also wanted to mention real quick that this is where we get into deleting data, right? So before we were just manipulating how we view the data and how the data was formatted. Once you get into actually deleting folks' responses, you want to be very careful to make sure that you're not, deleting any important feedback, important data. So it's worth, if you start getting into and, really deleting left and right and folks come in and see blanks, it's worth keeping maybe a log of why you deleted what you deleted, just so that if anybody wants to go through and see, who knows, folks can technically come in here and delete the negative or angry responses so that when the next person sees the data set, it looks like all glows and no grows. So worth writing down why you delete and what you delete and just being very cautious about that.
All right. So the last note we wanted to make was the tool of find and replace. So find and replace is helpful, for example, if your participants were asked whether they agreed, in the case of a survey, strongly agreed, disagreed, etc., with a statement, but then when you got the data back, you were given their responses in a numerical format. So 1 equals strongly disagree, 2 equals disagree. So you might want to change that back to the text. And the reason you might want to do this is if you're sharing this data with someone else and they might not know what the numbers mean, maybe they didn't design the survey, then they'll be able to interpret the text strongly disagree, but they might have no idea what the number 1 means. Or if you're trying to create a simple visualization, such as a pie chart, having the text instead of the numbers in your data set is really helpful. Alternatively, you can use find and replace to, if you have the text in the data set that you were given, so if you have strongly agree, disagree, etc., and you want to change that back to the numerical values to pass along to your data team member to do analysis on, then you can also find the text and then replace it with the number. So we are going to do a quick video on this. So in order to find, you would go to edit. You would go down to find and replace. And I'm just going to type in a word here, or I already did this because I pre-recorded this video, but I typed in the word prepared. I'm interested in finding the word prepared in this sheet. You can search all sheets or specific range. I'm just interested in this sheet. So by pressing find or selecting find, it is going to show me all of the times I've said the word prepared in this sheet. So it's highlighting the different times. As I keep on pressing find, it's going to show me all the times and go one by one. So that is one thing that you can do with find and replace. You can just find tools or find words that you're interested in or numbers. Next, for the purpose of this presentation, I want to show you how to do replacing numbers with text. I've created a key, which you all also have on your worksheet. So you see 1 is strongly disagree, 2 is disagree, 3 is neutral. And I am going to be going through and changing the numerical value to the text. So we will go to, and again, I'm using those, doing it on those 3 columns. Go to edit, go down to find and replace, type in number 1 in this case. I'm just interested in looking at this sheet. I want to replace it with the word strongly disagree. And then I'm going to select match entire cell contents. If I did not do this, it would find all of the ones in this entire sheet, including the ones in the timestamp, including if anyone has the number 1 in their age. So by selecting match entire cell contents, that means I'm just interested in finding the number, like just solely the number 1 and replacing those. So I go to find and then select replace all. So in this case, it replaced 2 instances of the number 1 with strongly disagree. I'm going to quickly show you how to do 2. All the settings remain the same. I'm going to find the number 2 and then select replace all with the word disagree. Again, making sure match entire cell contents, and 11 instances were found. So just as a quick exercise, we can stop it, Katrina, just to in the next slide, I want you all to replace all of the number 3s in your workbook with the word neutral using the find and replace. And answering the question, how many times was the number 3 replaced? So it says number of instances. So typing in find and replace with the word neutral. Correct answer, Rachel got it, is 14. Wonderful. All right. So just really quickly going through this, there's no video for this one. Some of those open-ended questions, we just wanted to note that there are a couple different ways to look at them. Katrina and I both noted that our personal preference is to move it to a different tab. You can do that by copying and pasting the text. You can use that, do it by using a formula import range, which might be a little bit more advanced, but it is spelled out, or it's written out in the Google Sheet that we shared with you all. Moving it separately from some of the quantitative data is just an easier way to read it through. There are different tools that you can use to kind of analyze this data, one of which is word clouds. Then there's different Google Sheet add-ons, which like find keywords within the qualitative data and look at trends. We've linked a Google Sheet add-on in the, if you're interested in checking it out, but that gets into the analysis. So. And then this is just an example of doing a word cloud of the data set that we shared. This just shows the words that are larger, means that more people responded with that word. So the most frequent word within that data set was the word prepared. All right. Really quickly, so we're not talking about how to design survey data, but there are ways, there are ways to design surveys so that you get less, or so that you get cleaner data, so that there's less cleaning on the tail end. So making certain questions required, so that people can't skip them. If you really want to know how certain campuses are, or how certain campuses are faring in something, you want to make sure that the campus question is required. Other questions you want to make, potentially open-ended ones, optional, because if you don't make them optional, sometimes you'll get some of those gibberish or NA because they're just trying to scroll through because they know they need to enter a response, but they don't have time to enter all of the text. Using the drop-down tools for question types, make sure that you all the spelling is the same versus people just typing in their responses, keeping it short and simple, being intentional about question type, and limiting one response per user would avoid the duplication. So I know it is